We love failure. We love it. We love failure. We're fascinated by it. Hi, I'm Barry McGrill, art historian, and I'm going to take you on a behind-the-scenes tour of one of the most famous paintings in the world in a tour that is definitely not ready for the Louvre. Look at Lisa Giardini, the subject of this portrait. The young spouse of a wealthy merchant sitting for a portrait because she is part of a newly minted class of persons, the merchant class. Trade expansion since the plague-infested Middle Ages has emerged as the driving force of culture all across Europe by this time in the Renaissance, and with people getting rich, they want to spend their money on items that reinforce their social and economic status. Therefore, portraits. But why is this painting such a failure? We have to start with the patron and ask why the painting is in the Louvre at all. Wasn't Da Vinci an Italian painter? How did this not so large painting on poplar wood get all the way to Paris? The artist brought it there. No, it wasn't stolen by Napoleon, as many people think. It was brought there by Da Vinci himself, late in his life, probably in the last 10 years of his life, when he was summoned to the court of Francis I, King of France. He was to be an official advisor. Remember that Da Vinci didn't think of himself as a painter first, but as a scientist or maybe an engineer and a thinker. Painters, by the way, were much lower on the social scale than, say, thinkers or engineers, builders, architects. Painting was a craft. So, back to Da Vinci. Why is the painting even in his possession? It must have been rejected by the sitter and her husband. What's not to like? It must be a successful likeness with this mysterious smile, faithfully rendered in the soft light with a technique called sfumato, that is the blurring of the edges to create soft focus. The kind of soft focus we would get from a special lens in a camera now, that is so sought after. But what of the background? Look at the background carefully. It's a dramatic scene of craggy mountains and ocean disappearing into the distance using a technique called aerial perspective. That's where the distance is determined by the subtle washing out of the colors and the far background with a bluish kind of a tint, as you can see. In fact, there is no middle ground at all. And this heightens the dramatic tension of the picture. But look again, this is no ordinary landscape. In fact, it is completely made up. It's a fabrication of Da Vinci's mind. There is no real place in Italy or anywhere in the world that looks like this. It is a complete figment of his imagination. Now look closely at the horizon. On one side of Mona Lisa's head, we see that the horizon line is up here, but then on the other side it's much lower down here. That's impossible. It also creates and adds to the tension of this picture. We don't notice it immediately, but it's there, nagging at the back of our minds as we're looking at it. Now that I've mentioned it, you can't stop looking at it. Then let's look at the sitter and her dress. It's pretty ordinary for a special portrait, wouldn't you say? It's almost a single tone of browns and ochres. There's no fancy jewelry, no special dress, no fancy dress, and it's a 3/4 length pose, which was fairly unusual at the time in the Renaissance. But there's a reason for this, as you'll see. And not only that, she is looking directly at us, not off into the distance in some sort of imagined beside us or behind us horizon, No, she's looking directly at the viewer. So now, let's come back to this idea of tension and how Da Vinci resolves it. He resolves this by using something very stable, that is, a triangular composition, where if we start at the top of Mona Lisa's head and draw a line down through her shoulder and into her elbow on both sides, we will have a very stable composition, a triangular composition, because of this geometric form. The triangle is broad at the base and pointy at the tip. It isn't going to tip over. It is stable. And this is an isosceles triangle, the most stable of all. But look even more closely. Da Vinci is doing something that is even more stable. If we draw a line from the elbow through the hands on both sides, we'll see that he's actually creating a pyramidal. We see that he's actually creating a pyramid composition. And now I can finish that by drawing a line through her nose and down into where her hands are meeting. A pyramid, three-dimensional composition, is even more stable, and it's jutting into the space of the viewer. It's pushing into the viewer's space. That's why it's a three-quarter composition. Without the hands to act as a device for that composition, we would have a standard triangular composition, no different than any of the others at the time. But Da Vinci goes that one step forward. So let's go back again to this idea of the failure of this picture. It was probably rejected because they didn't like the background, maybe they didn't like the fantastical background that he created, or they didn't like that she was dressed in something a little ordinary, or they didn't like that she was in three-quarter view and staring directly at the viewer. It could have been any of those things. Maybe they didn't think it was a faithful likeness, although we have other paintings of the same sitter, and it is quite compellingly lifelike. But what they didn't seem to care about or know was how he's creating tension and resolving it with stability. That's something that artists would be most interested in, and we have the benefit of hindsight of history to look back at this and appreciate its innovation. So we appreciate what was a failure and we rename it innovation in our day. So this is a good metaphor for what we're going to be looking at throughout the rest of this course as we explore museums in this unprecedented time as they've opened up their collections in an online way that we may not see again once this pandemic is over and people can go back into the galleries. I don't know what's going to happen with the collections of these museums that they've made available. Maybe they'll always be available, but this is a good time for us to dig into what's going on behind the scenes and look at things a little differently. Join me in the next video where we're going to look more closely at the walkthrough of one of the virtual tours at the Louvre. See you there.